Over to
All
you,
right.
Miranda.
Got the recording notification. Cool. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for attending. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here. Thanks for your interest in learning more about the staffing survey report. We'll be discussing some of the findings, as well as some of the behind the scenes work that went into developing the report. My name is Miranda Fair. I'm the Publishing and Open Scholarship Librarian at Towson University. I co-chaired this task force along with Melissa Chim, but I will let each presenter briefly introduce themselves at the beginning of their section, but that is who I am. I would also like to say thanks to all my fellow task force members, including those who have since stepped back from the task force but were instrumental in survey development earlier on. So our plan for today is to give an overview of the task force, the work we've done over the past 2 years, delve into what the survey process was like, discuss some of our findings, as well as the challenges we ran into along the way, and identify areas where we'd like to see this research continue. We'll have time for questions and discussion at the end, but feel free to send any questions in the chat as you think of them throughout. So the brief overview is the task force existed for a fixed 2-year term. It's kind of weird to talk about in the past tense, but I guess this is our last kind of official activity as a group. But we've met monthly in order to do research and preparation of the survey, developing our research questions, crafting the survey, then after it had been completed, analyzing the data and producing the report. The task force was open to volunteers from both LPC member institutions and non-member institutions. It was formed in summer of 2024, and this was part of the shift of having the directory be every other year instead of annually, and then having the off-year data collection activity be a deeper dive into a special topic, the first one being staffing. So I will hand it over to Anita for a bit to talk more about the charge, among other things.
Great. So I'll be talking about the goal, the charge, research questions, as well as developing the survey. I'm Anita Wells. I'm Associate Professor in the University Libraries at Virginia Tech and Assistant Director of Open Education and Scholarly Communication Librarian. So the survey task force was charged to conduct a survey that would develop a more complete understanding of how the work of library publishing is staffed with the ultimate goal of identifying good practices and pain points. It's intended to be the first in an ongoing series of topical task forces whose work will complement the library publishing directory. And similar to the library publishing directory, this is a program level survey, not an individual response staff level survey. It's really aimed to align with the strategic direction of the LPC community plan, which intends to support development of staffing best practices, gather data and resources that library publishers can use to advocate for continuing and increased support for their programs, and also aims to foster discussion of different staffing, funding, and sustainability models. It's also important to note that we emphasize privacy in this survey. In some cases, survey respondents didn't reveal the name of their organization or program. Not every respondent provided all information, so we did ask for salary information. We did not link institutional identities to responses. Responses are only available in aggregate, so we feel very trusted that people did complete the survey. So next slide, please. We had 5 primary CELBA research questions underneath our main research question. Those would be: how are institutional level library publishing programs staffed? How has the staffing changed over time and why? Does the staffing match the expected output? How do external tools and technologies impact staffing? And then the 5th, what processes have libraries implemented to improve or, in other words, expand the number of historically underrepresented staff? Next slide, please. We examined existing data because we wanted to know if some of our questions would be have already been asked, or if there was data that we should try not to replicate, or if there's data that's out of date. So we looked at the 2024 publishing directory. We looked at the LPC job board postings from November 2013 up to August 2024. And we looked at library publishing bibliography as well as the Association of Research Libraries spec kit from 2017, which is quite dated. What did we find in these kinds of things? So we found some limited demographic and historical information from the LPC directory. The directory also aided us in developing a distribution list for the survey invitations as well as results. The job board postings helped us really significantly in identifying educational, professional experience, knowledge, soft skills, technical skills, professional values, alignment as themes that were really throughout all of those different positions. We noted that some of the skills are further grouped into software systems, coding, web proficiencies, editorial skills, copyright and licensing, data and analytics, digital humanities, preservation, OA, OER skills. We also extracted some salary data. So something that was really, really helpful was the ARL spec kit actually, because it asked a lot of very specific questions regarding what people do, what kinds of activities. So we used a lot of the framing from the spec kit, even though the data is a lot older, and we made some changes to help this fit our purposes a lot better. Next slide, please. So in developing the survey, we broke these research questions really into three separate categories: humans, resources, and the work. So who are you hiring and drawing on for the work? What kind of resources do you have to work with? What are the responsibilities? What is the work that people are doing, and who is doing that work? As well as how have these things changed? There was a lot of work that went into the survey development. The questions were refined several times. They were formatted in Qualtrics. We had external and internal people analyze them for content, accessibility, and can these actually be completed by respondents? We're thankful for the several survey testers that looked at our questions within and as well as outside of the task force. So I will turn this back over to Miranda for the rest of the developing the survey. Thanks.
So we did consider a few platforms to host the survey. We did end up deciding on Qualtrics, which I have access to through my institution. So based on our research questions and the different pieces of demographic information we needed to collect about the publishing programs, we split the survey into a few distinct sections, which were separate from kind of our three main questions. So demographics, we were trying to collect information about the institution, what it was, the age of the program, how many employees were involved in the publishing program, and then whether those employees were librarians, non-librarian staff members, student workers, freelance workers, or volunteer workers. We then asked for more information about each individual reported as a separate questionnaire page, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. Things we wanted were job titles, salaries, which that was optional, what categories of work within library publishing this employee did, and what percentage of their full work week those duties constituted. So not of their full publishing workload, just their full workload in general. I think this is a fun tidbit, so I thought I'd share it. Since the survey is open internationally, we provided a drop-down menu to designate which currency the salary was listed in. It did include other that allowed free entry, so anyone could fill in their own, but there were a bunch preloaded into the drop-down menu, and those were based off of the locations of all the institutions that filled out the most recent directory entry at the time, so that was 2024. After that, we asked about changes that the program may have faced in staffing and in services. We split these into new programs, which was 2022 to present, so the last 3 years as of 2025 when the survey was being administered, and then more established programs, which were pre-2022. For newer programs, we asked them to discuss how things had gone and how changes had happened since the program's inception. For older programs, we asked them if they'd faced a period of significant change, and if so, to answer the questions pertaining to the most recent period of change. We possibly could have also considered newer programs to be new in the last 5 years instead of 3. Part of the reasoning was because we were discussing periods of change. There was a very large period of change in 2020. So the height of the COVID-19 pandemic was a big thing for its own reasons, possibly unrelated to how library publishing would have progressed in general. There were a lot of hiring freezes. So a new program could be something that emerged in the period after that. And the survey was open to both member and non-member institutions. It was officially released June 16th of 2025, so almost a year ago. The original deadline was July 31st, so respondents had about 6 weeks to complete the survey. We ended up extending it another month to August 31st due to some reasons that I will discuss in the next slide, and it officially closed to responses on September 8th. We distributed it to past directory respondents, the LPC listserv, and some other relevant listservs. So, a few challenges that we faced with the survey itself. Some were with the platform of Qualtrics. We learned during the process of building the survey that there's no way to do dynamic responses in Qualtrics. So the original idea was that we could make, for the section that pertains to individual employees, that there'd be a way to populate a large table with the number of employees that of each type that were indicated on the previous page, but there is not any way to do this. So we had to settle for separate pages for each employee, which wasn't preferable because we wanted respondents to be able to fill it out on one page so they could see all of the information they were filling in at once. But this could also not be done dynamically. So, for example, ideally, you could put in that you had 3 non-librarian staff members. It would give you 3 copies of the questionnaire, but Qualtrics does not work that way. We had to do it manually using survey flow logic with a bunch of separate copies of the same questionnaire. So if you said you had 2 volunteers, it would give you the copy for if you had 1, and then a second copy for if you had 2, and so on and so forth. We had to cap it at 20 per employee type, but nobody reported that many. Unfortunately, this made the survey very long, especially for large programs, so that contributed to why we extended the deadline. Another issue introduced by the flow logic was that there's no back button, so we had a few requests to abandon a previously partially filled survey and take a second response from that institution, so we handled all that during deduplication. Because of these challenges, we made a few improvements after releasing the survey. Part of that was a more robust introductory text explaining what information we were looking for in advance, so that whoever was responsible for responding on behalf of a program could go collect the information and then sit down to fill out the survey once they had done that. We included a doc and PDF copy of the questionnaire to help facilitate this, and then, of course, we extended the deadline. So I will hand it over to Bailey to talk more about responses and results.
All right, thank you, Miranda. My name is Bailey Lake. I'm the Open Strategies Librarian at Eastern Kentucky University, and I'll just be sharing a little bit about the demographic information of the responses that we got. So we had 142 total responses collected, which gave us information about 83 distinct programs from at least 9 countries. The top 3 were the US, which had 47, 6 from Canada, and 4 from the UK. We found that 78 programs were established prior to 2022 and 9 after 2022. And the majority of programs, 55, have 1 to 3 staff members. And I included that chart just for the rest of the numbers. The lowest number, of course, has 10 plus. Next slide, please. We created the survey with the idea that one person from each university could fill it out on behalf of their publishing program. So from the 83 programs, we had 290 individual staff members that were mentioned. 66% reported being full-time, 20% part-time, and 5% on demand. Of those, 74% of the positions were considered permanent, and 53 were librarians, 47 were non-librarians, 6% were students. We also found that 88% of permanent staff were full-time and 11% were part-time. Next slide, please. Okay. As Anita and Miranda both mentioned, most of the demographic information was optional reporting because we wanted to preserve people's privacy and make sure that no one stopped completing the survey because they were uncomfortable with what we were asking. So if you notice some variation in the number of responses, that is why. We had 125 responses that reported years of service. 65% of full-time publishing roles had less than 5 years experience in their role. And then this chart depicts the other years of experience, with 8 to 10 years having the fewest responses. Okay, next slide, please. As staff, most of us in the library publishing field, we know that it is extremely common for library publishing to be just one aspect of your job or something that is picked up in addition to your standard job duties. So we created this section of the survey to address that important work and to find out how many are dedicated jobs only for library publishing, and or if most publishing tasks are sort of completed off the side of the desk, as they say, or in addition to more traditional library responsibilities. 266 responses reported job duties related to their position, and we found that on average, 53.56% of respondents' work week was dedicated to publishing. So 94 of 266 employees reported only being able to dedicate 25% or less of their work time to publishing tasks. And then the next highest was 78 of 266 reported 100% of work time spent on publishing. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, we also wanted to recognize that work time percentage varies between different employee types. So librarians reported an average of 43% of their total work time spent on publishing activities, while non-library staff reported 51%, and student workers reported 79% of their time spent on publishing. And then after investigating that percentage of the work week that employees dedicated to library publishing, we wanted to get even more specific about the actual publishing tasks that employees were carrying out. So we presented broad categories with examples given for each type of publishing task that might fall under their workload. So these were acquisitions and planning, advising, assessment, discovery, editorial support, finance and business, production, technical support, and we always include an other option. Respondents could list 3 categories for each employee to indicate how much each task took up in their work time. We found advising was listed most frequently at 110 times, which makes sense as advising includes educating, training users, sharing best practices, and advising on relevant topics like copyright. This is followed by production at 86 and editorial support at 81. Production also had the highest average amount of time spent on these tasks at 31.5%, followed by those other duties that aren't in your job description, right? And then the third, is discovery at 23%. And discovery includes indexing, registering ISSNs or DOIs, digitization, metadata, and cataloging. Next slide, please. We did ask for salary data in our survey in order to examine some the compensation disparities around job classifications. However, as with all of the demographic information, it was optional to provide salary info. And because it was optional, most respondents did opt to leave that question blank. Some of the responses we did get were also kind of extreme outliers. So due to low response numbers and the fact that we had lots of responses from different countries with different costs of living, and also some questionable data, we just opted not to discuss salary in the main report. However, if you're interested, we did include the aggregate gap data in Appendix A of the publication. And so for those reasons, the task force did not feel it was appropriate to draw conclusions from the salary data. And I will turn it over to Lauren.
Thank you so much, Bailey. I'm Lauren Collister, and I am the Research Engagement Manager at Invest in Open Infrastructure. And I had the pleasure of working on sort of the qualitative questions that came up during this report. So the main questions that we asked in this section were about staffing changes over the past years and what was the cause and what did they look like. So just to start, for those who responded to this question, and again, not everybody made it to this part of the survey, so the numbers here do not match the full size. Full size of the respondent pool. We found that about 1/3 of programs reported an increase in staff numbers, and about 1/3 reported no change. And the remaining 1/3 were mixed between decreases, reorganizations, or those who did not respond to this question. What was really great about this section of the report is that we had an opportunity to look into free text responses, to do some qualitative analysis to gain further insight into this landscape. So there's a lot more detail in the report about this, but we looked at the free text responses that contained enough information to analyze, which was 53 of the total responses. And a subgroup of the task force conducted an iterative coding process. We did a first pass of initial categorization for themes related to our research questions. And then we did a more thorough coding with 2 coders for each question, and a third person consulted when people did not agree on those codes. Again, more detail is in the report, but I do want to go through some of our findings to pique your interest. So in this slide here, you see the responses for an open-ended free text question about the reason for staffing changes. For almost half of the responses, we did not receive a concrete reason for the change, which is represented by this big yellow section on the bottom. Of the remaining, about 20% of programs indicated growth of their publishing portfolio or the scope of their programs as a reason for the staffing changes. So that's like there's more journals or books, there's more groups served, etc., that resulted in more staff. About 15% said it was about sustainability. So examples included reducing duplicative work, aligning to actual program use rather than the expectations, and some for more for older programs, basically like just adjusting as you go, knowing how much time things take and as you gain expertise in the area. And then about another 17% reported that turnover, retirement, or downsizing or layoffs as the reason for changes in staff number. So in addition to this reason, we were able to code the written responses for another factor, which is whether these changes were planned or intentional, we called them, or if they were in response to outside events or imposed upon the program, which is what we called reactive. So on the next slide, you'll see that about 45% of responses did not contain enough information to categorize them accurately. But of those that did respond in a way that had meaningful information, about 31% of programs reported that the changes were intentional, whereas only about 18% were reactive, and the rest were like a mixture of the two. There were some that were planned, and then some unfortunate events or whatever happened. And so they had a mixture there. So some of the words that people used in responses that indicated intentional changes were phrases like years of advocacy, or intentional planned growth of the publishing program, or growth due to institutional need, or intended migrations. Responses that indicated reactive changes included phrases like budget cuts, lost a colleague to another institution, or our hiring plans were not approved. On the next slide, you can see a chart that sums up and combines the previous 3 slides, gives you a little bit of a different visual here. So for those responses that contained enough information to analyze, we can clearly see that increases in staff due to program growth were largely intentional. Like, this is not surprising, but it's nice to have some numbers to put behind it, right? When programs plan for growth, they increase their staff or they adjust their organization to accommodate that growth. On the other side, the reactive responses were largely due to losing staff, whether through retirement, which might be a good thing, or layoffs, or staff turnovers, or positions not being rehired, which I think we can all agree are not necessarily good things. Those that mentioned being reactive to these events also sometimes reported having to make difficult decisions or cut services to their existing portfolios in these free text responses. And in the report, you can read additional analyses of how these staffing numbers and the intentionality of the changes match with expected program outputs. If you're curious to learn more about the analysis, there's more in there. Here's a little spoiler for the report. Those who were intentional about their staffing changes reported that their staffing size better matched their responsibilities and expectations for the program. And those who were reactive or who had downsized reported more mismatch between expectations and staffing capacity. All right, I want to cover a couple of other research questions that we attempted to analyze using similar methods. So we had asked a question about whether programs had attempted to increase the diversity or the representation of historically underrepresented staff in their program. Unfortunately, we had only 20 responses to this, which can't really be indicative of any trends overall. But we did share what we did find. 9 responses said yes, they did try to increase the number of historically underrepresented staff through overall hiring practices at their institution or through partnerships with other organizations. The rest said no, either because they were subjected to general hiring freezes, and 3 of them said that they did not do this because they were located in states in the United States of America that had eliminated diversity initiatives and therefore could not engage in this at the time. Recall that this survey was sent out in 2025, so we have captured, in fact, a sad but real snapshot of what was going on in some parts of the United States at that time. And then on the next slide, the other question that we wanted to ask was about responsibility centers, where we wanted to ask about like who was responsible, who was a decision maker for library publishing, and where were they located in the organization. So again, we had very limited responses to this, but here is what we did find, and it's a very mixed result. So we think that this is a fruitful area for follow-up research. For those that did respond, almost half reported that there is one person responsible for decision-making in library publishing. However, alarmingly, to me anyway, 27% of the respondents indicated that there was no clear responsibility center for this work, and the remaining responses just did not provide any clear information. For those that responded, 2 programs reported that they had a dedicated library publishing unit, while 3 said that library publishing were part of a department's charge, and 5 respondents reported that publishing was a cross-departmental effort in their library. So because we had such limited responses to this, we really encourage a follow-up study specifically about this information and how this is organized in libraries. Our study really only asked about this tangentially in optional questions, so we did not get enough information to truly find a trend here and would love to see a follow-up. And so would Melanie in the chat, apparently. All right, so now I will turn it over to Melissa to take us through the rest of the webinar.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Chim. I am the Scholarly Communications Librarian at Excelsior University, and I am the co-chair of the task force with Miranda. And so here are our main takeaways that we took away from the survey and from this whole process. And the biggest overall arching theme is that libraries are doing more with less. And so we definitely noticed, of course, that there has been a lot of staff limitations and, of course, also shortages in the library publishing world. Paired with that is less institutional support. Alarmingly, it seems like a lot of libraries and universities that are hosting publishing aren't giving that support to its staff or to its program. So I mentioned before, that small staff that is working in publishing is doing a lot more with less. There's also this need for specialized skills, as we kind of noticed with the distribution of the library publishing responsibilities. There may be only 1 or 2 librarians in a department that actually work on publishing as their main focus. They could be an open education librarian, a scholarly communications librarian, but there is that need for a specialized person working in the program. And as Lauren just mentioned too, a lot of these staffing changes that are reactive are answers to events such as turnover or retirement. And so we see a lot of these changes kind of working alongside intentional changes too when library programs hear about budget cuts. Can we have the next slide, please? So as we're kind of looking into the future, these are basically the topics and themes we are hoping to explore in any future iterations. We would love to see this survey repeated again in the future, whether maybe a year from now might be a little too soon to see actual changes. But if we could redo the survey maybe 3 years, 5 years, then we could see actual changes. And as Laura mentioned before, too, the 2025 survey was such a snapshot also of how things were going politically and culturally in the United States. So it would be interesting to see those kind of changes in the future over time as well. And it'd be great to check the changes and to see maybe if there was more growth, less growth, but hopefully more growth. One of the pain points that we had, and I think this was touched on a little bit too, was that the respondents that we didn't have, some of them didn't answer all of the questions. There were a lot of questions that were left blank. A lot of respondents did respond to the first few questions, but we did leave space for people to provide more information and to kind of ask follow-up questions. Not a lot of respondents took advantage of that, and so we feel sometimes like we're missing part of the story and part of the context. So in the future, we would love to see maybe if we could update the survey or at least get more respondents that are more willing to share broader information. And of course, it's understandable that they didn't. Of course, we would love to see it though. It would be interesting to see if we could do kind of a deeper dive into other departments and units that are maybe in the publishing sphere, but not necessarily within the same department. Sometimes copyright centers work independently at the library and the university, or even legal counsels would help with copyright. Things like that might be interesting to look at too, since they are supporting publishing in a way, but they're not within the program itself. And of course, as we look into the future, technology is always a big role. We've seen so much regarding AI already. So as we kind of look into the future, it would be interesting to see how AI is going to affect those things too. If you want to get very dystopian, we may see publishing programs relying solely on AI, and that would be a little bit scary. Hopefully, we don't get to that point in the future, but keeping an eye on how AI is actually supporting publishing or making changes to it would be something to keep an eye on. Next slide, please. We have some remaining questions that we think would be a great focus for research in the future. First would be, how is staffing impacted if a workplace is unionized? We really couldn't get that much information from the survey in its current form, so this would be great to kind of use as a jumping off point for another survey or even another research project. How do job duties and the percentage of time spent on them shift and vary throughout the year? As we kind of noticed before, Bailey was speaking about percentage-wise, how some people have 90 or even 100% devoted to publishing, but then other roles are, of course, wearing many different hats, and maybe publishing is only 25% of the many hats that they're wearing. Another interesting question would be, how are employees who do not have publishing tasks as a formal part of their role involved in an impacting publishing program later? This would be great to see, especially with student workers, freelancers, and other jobs that not necessarily have publishing as 100% in their job description. And finally, what staffing-related differences exist between programs who have publishing strongly embedded in organizational culture and those who do not? This goes back to the question of institutional support also. How are institutions actually supporting publishing? Is it a big goal, a strategic goal of their university to kind of disseminate scholarly output, and how is the library supporting that? And then can we go to the last slide, please? All right. Thank you so much for attending our presentation and listening to our findings. We were really excited to share everything with you, and we would love to open it up for some Q&A.
So we do have a few questions in the Q&A in the chat that folks have raised. We invite you to add more of your thoughts, more of your questions. One person asks, how would you suggest following up about salary data collection even if you think following up on this is a good idea or not. The data is perplexing. It'd be interesting to see what happened there. And those of you who've responded in chat, would you like to unmic and chat with us, please?
Sure.
Bailey and I said basically the same thing. So Bailey, go for it.
Yeah, I just said the same as Melanie as well. It is definitely perplexing data. We got some really weird responses. But definitely if we focused exclusively on salary and also had a more anonymous survey, I think people get a little self-conscious or, just because of the culture that employers have created around sharing your salary. A more anonymous survey would help. And also we were having one person fill out the survey for their whole publishing program. So we theorized that maybe they didn't take the time to stop and look those up and didn't know off the top of their head, which is certainly understandable. But it would be interesting to find more information for sure.
Melanie, did you want to comment on your what you said about the type of survey and what a methodology might be for this?
Oh,
If you
yeah,
would
yeah.
like, sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. Yeah, so I also said like I think if we really effectively wanted to get salary data, we would need to do a dedicated salary survey. And I don't know what the methodology for that looks like, but I know that
Yeah.
salary surveys are a thing that happens and that I'm sure that there's models out there that we could follow. I think what we learned is that it's maybe not going to be effective to just like roll collecting salary data into a broader survey, and that's something you really have to like go after with like laser precision to get meaningful data. So that's what I'm taking away from it.
Yeah, thanks.
We can, Anita. There was the other question about the staffing changes since when, and I just want to clarify for a moment about that. So we asked those questions about have your staffing numbers changed in your library publishing program? For most of the survey, the questions were about in the past 12 months. So talk about the percentage of this person's work in the past 12 months. Have you hired anybody in the past 12 months? All these things in the past 12 months. For this section in particular, for those programs that started since 2022, we asked since your program's inception, since at that point it was only 3 years. And that's, plenty of time for there to maybe have been one staffing change, maybe. For the programs older than that, we specifically asked the same thing since your program's inception. And then if there have been multiple periods of these changes, please focus on the most recent one. And I do recall, just off the top of my head, there were a couple of very mature programs, programs that have been around for many years. I guess I shouldn't call them mature, programs that have been around for many years that reported multiple periods of change for different reasons and different types. And so I think, for those, if anybody in the audience is listening and is part of one of those programs, I think it would be really fascinating to write up a sort of history of your library publishing program and to talk more in depth about what has happened there, to sort of tell that story so it's not, lost in the bowels of a survey conducted in 2025.
I have a kind of a related comment, which is kind of pulling together a couple of threads from the presentation. One of them, so I was really struck by what you said about the like strategies for intentional growth, like where you'd seen intentional growth that people reported, like we did a lot of work to make this happen. And then the other thing was, what Lauren was picking up on, and that idea that like there's a story here and we're not necessarily getting the whole story because we just asked for these specific data points. I personally would love to see some kind of like, storytelling effort based on, those programs that have like put in a significant amount of work and had some success, like expanding their program, expanding their staffing, or, adjusting their staffing in productive ways. I don't know if there's any members of the Showcase Week task force that are here right now, but take note, Showcase Week task force. This might be a fun little like mini component for the next one.
I'll ask a question of the folks in the audience. I wonder if what we've reported today in the survey matches your experience where you are. And if you could just, maybe drop in the chat a yes, this matches, or a, no, this, something's, this, this is missing something, or I have an additional thought about this. Because it is really interesting to see the breadth of responses to this survey. So I was curious how folks in the audience, if this matches up with what you're seeing where you are.
I do feel like that's one of the constants. Anytime we ask people about any aspect of their library publishing program, it's like we're going to get a huge variety of different responses. Like they do different things, they're organized in different ways, they're staffed in different ways. So this was definitely kind of in line with what I would expect in that way. Also, if you filled out this survey, let us know how that was. Well, first of all, thank you if you filled it out. And second of all, yeah, how was the experience? We can probably turn off the recording if we're at the point of asking people to put things in chat.